The vast, salt-heavy expanse of the open ocean is often portrayed as the primary executioner of those who dare to cross it, yet the cold reality of maritime tragedy suggests a far more intimate betrayer. While we fear the rogue wave, the shifting tectonic plates of the deep, or the gale-force winds that can shred Kevlar sails like tissue paper, the statistics point toward a failure that occurs within the skull and the bloodstream long before the hull ever breaches. It is a phenomenon well documented by naval researchers and maritime safety boards, yet rarely discussed in the romanticized lore of the sea, the 36-hour wall. This is the precise window where the human body ceases to be a vessel of survival and becomes an active liability, a biological machine grinding its gears into a state of functional obsolescence. When a sailor dies, the ocean is merely the environment. The cause of death is almost always the systematic collapse of the human nervous system under the weight of sustained neurological debt. The ocean does not need to be angry to be lethal. It only needs to be patient. To understand why the 36-hour mark is so catastrophic, one must look at the circadian architecture of the human brain. We are terrestrial creatures governed by a rhythm of light and dark that has been hard-coded into our DNA over millions of years. When a sailor enters a high-stakes environment, whether it is a solo circumnavigation or a short-handed delivery, the first 24 hours are often fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline, cortisol, and the initial novelty of the mission. The body can mask the lack of sleep through a process known as compensatory effort. However, as the clock ticks past the 24-hour mark and enters the second night of continuous wakefulness, the biological cost becomes exponential rather than linear. By hour 36, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex decision-making, risk assessment, and impulse control, essentially begins to power down. This is a metabolic reality where the brain's glucose consumption shifts, leaving the higher-order regions starved of the energy required to process reality accurately. What does this look like in a real-world sailing scenario? Imagine a solo sailor navigating a busy shipping lane. At hour 12, they are sharp, calculating the closest point of approach for every AIS target with mathematical precision. At hour 24, they are tired but functional, relying on alarms and coffee to bridge the gaps. But at hour 36, the brain enters a state that researchers call micro-sleeps. These are involuntary bursts of sleep lasting from a fraction of a second to 30 seconds. The sailor's eyes may be wide open, staring at the horizon or the chart plotter, but the brain is no longer processing visual data. In those 30 seconds, a boat traveling at 8 knots moves over 400 feet. If a buoy, a container, or a change in wind direction occurs during that blackout, the sailor is effectively a passenger on a ghost ship. Have you ever experienced a moment of missing time while driving or working? Tell us in the comments how you handled that sudden realization of danger, as these lapses are the first signs that your internal clock is failing. The physiological degradation at hour 36 is not just about sleepiness. It is about chemical toxicity. During sleep, the glymphatic system acts as a biological waste management service, flushing out metabolic byproducts like adenosine and beta-amyloid from the brain's interstitial spaces. When you stay awake for 36 hours, this cleaning process is suspended. The result is a literal fog of molecular waste that slows down synaptic transmission. Research conducted by the U.S., Navy, and various maritime institutes has shown that after 36 hours of total sleep deprivation, a person's cognitive impairment is equivalent to a blood alcohol concentration, BAC, of 0.10%. In most jurisdictions, this is well above the legal limit for operating a motor vehicle. Yet, we expect sailors to make life-or-death decisions, calculating weather grid files, managing sail trim in a squall, or diagnosing an engine failure, while essentially drunk on their own exhaustion. The brain begins to prioritize basic survival functions over higher-level reasoning, a state known as cognitive tunneling. This tunneling effect is perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the 36-hour wall. A sailor might spend an hour obsessively trying to fix a minor piece of rigging while ignoring a massive storm cell appearing on the radar. Their world narrows until they can no longer see the big picture of their own survival. They lose the ability to multitask, which is the cornerstone of safe seamanship. If the engine begins to overheat while the sailor is trying to navigate a narrow channel, the exhausted brain may only be able to focus on one problem, leading to a catastrophic failure of the other. This narrowing of focus is often accompanied by an eerie sense of calm or detachment, as the amygdala, the brain's emotional center, becomes dysregulated. The sailor may see a dangerous situation developing and simply not care, or worse, they may not even recognize it as a threat. Beyond the neurological collapse, the physical body begins to betray the sailor in more visceral ways. The 36-hour mark is often where the cold shock of the environment begins to penetrate the core. Even in relatively temperate waters, the constant exposure to wind, spray, and the physical exertion of moving on a heaving deck drains the body's caloric reserves. Thermoregulation is an energy-intensive process. When the brain is exhausted, it can no longer efficiently manage the distribution of heat. Peripheral vasoconstriction, the body's way of keeping the core warm, becomes sluggish. This leads to a loss of fine motor skills. The hands that were once capable of tying a complex knot in the dark become claws. A simple task like clipping a safety tether or adjusting a winch becomes a Herculean effort fraught with the risk of injury. It is here that the ocean finds its opening. A slipped foot, a missed handhold, or a failure to clip in because the brain forgot the sequence is all it takes. The maritime industry has long known that human error is responsible for approximately 75% to 80% of all accidents at sea. Of those, nearly 20% are directly linked to fatigue. Yet, the culture of sailing often rewards the tough sailor who can stay awake for days. This is a deadly misconception that ignores the hard limits of human biology. The body does not adapt to sleep deprivation. It simply fails more quietly. By the time a sailor realizes they are in trouble, they no longer have the cognitive capacity to fix it. They are trapped in a feedback loop where every mistake requires more effort to correct, which in turn increases fatigue, leading to even greater mistakes. This is the silent killer of the high seas. The ocean doesn't have to break the boat. It just has to wait for the sailor's body to break itself. It is a war of attrition where the sea has infinite time, and the human body has a very clear expiration date. As we dive deeper into the science of maritime survival, it becomes clear that the most important piece of safety equipment on any vessel is not the life raft or the EPIRB, but a well-rested mind. The transition from hour 35 to hour 36 is the tipping point where the heroic effort of staying awake becomes a suicidal gamble. The hallucinations often begin here. This is not just a sailor's yarn, it is a clinical symptom of sensory deprivation and neural fatigue. Sailors have reported seeing non-existent islands, hearing voices in the wind, or even believing there are other people on the boat with them. These are not just tricks of the mind, they are the brain's desperate attempt to make sense of a reality it no longer has the energy to process. The brain starts to fill in the gaps with data that isn't there, leading to a complete break from situational awareness. When you are at sea, do you prioritize a strict sleep schedule, or do you push through until the work is done? Share your strategies for staying sharp in the comments below. Furthermore, the cardiovascular system begins to show signs of extreme stress after 36 hours. The constant elevation of heart rate due to the motion of the sea, combined with the lack of rest, leads to a state of systemic inflammation. Blood pressure spikes, and the heart's ability to respond to sudden bursts of activity, like reefing a sail in a sudden gust, is compromised. In older sailors, this can be the trigger for a cardiac event that is then blamed on the stress of the storm, when in reality, it was the 36 hours of preparation and anxiety leading up to it that did the damage. The body's immune system also takes a massive hit. Studies show that even a single night of total sleep deprivation can reduce the activity of natural killer cells, the body's first line of defense, by up to 70%. At sea, where even a small cut can quickly become infected in the damp, salty environment, this loss of immune function can be a death sentence. In conclusion, the ocean is a mirror that reflects our own biological limitations back at us. It is a harsh environment, yes, but it is a predictable one governed by the laws of physics. The human body, however, is governed by the laws of biology, and those laws have a very strict expiration date when it comes to performance. Respecting the 36-hour wall is not a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate mark of an experienced mariner. To ignore it is to invite the ocean to do what it does best: reclaim what is no longer capable of defending itself. The next time you hear a story of a mysterious disappearance or a tragic grounding, look past the weather reports and the technical failures. Look at the logbook. Look at the hours. You will likely find that the real enemy wasn't the sea, but the flesh and bone behind the wheel. If this analysis of the human factor in sailing changed how you view your next passage, let us know in the comments. Have you ever pushed past your limits and felt your own body starting to turn against you? Your story could save a life, providing a real-world warning to those who think they can outrun their own biology. What is the longest you've gone without sleep at the helm? And looking back, how many micro-errors did you make that could have been fatal? Let's start a conversation about the real limits of the human vessel.